Okay, I see the record. Great. Thank you, Lois. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining this webinar on editing international books. So this is part of the ACRL International Perspectives on Academic and Research Libraries webinar series, and we have a couple of really great books coming out next year. And so we have editors, co-editors who will be sharing their perspectives and experiences on the trends in international librarianship. And so for those who are not familiar with the international perspectives on academic and research libraries, I am Ray Pun of Fresno State, one of the co-conveners of this discussion group with Megan Houlihan, who is at NYU Abu Dhabi, who couldn't be here today, but just to tell you that we both are been co-convening. This will be our second year, and there's a lot of webinars that are out there that we've organized, and so feel free to take a look. If you are an ACRL member, feel free to join. There's also a listserv and all these other information that you can join and hear more about it. We've had speakers from all the way down to I guess Peru to Ivory Coast to Korea, so it's South Korea. So it's quite interesting to have their perspective and share their thoughts. But today we'll be having a different panel discussion. We'll be featuring these three speakers: Yelena Luckert, who is the Director of Research and Learning at University of Maryland Libraries; Lindsay Inge Carpenter, who is the first year experience librarian there. So they both have a new book coming out, and they'll share more information on that. And Layla June Rod Welsh, who is at University of Northern Iowa, the outreach librarian, who has a new book coming out as well. So this discussion came out from this other panel we did last year at ALA in Chicago. So for those who knew about this or heard about this, there are a lot of new books coming out on international librarianship. Here are just a couple of them. And I wanted to say that we wanted to highlight some upcoming ones. And so what Yelena, Lindsay, and Layla will talk about, covering their own books, but also we'll be doing a Q&A format so you can get more perspective on the editing process. So the goal of this webinar is really to introduce the upcoming international librarianship books, as well as the process of publishing and the process of creating an edited volume that can be helpful for your own professional development. But I highly encourage all of you to take a look at these new books if you're interested in working abroad and so forth, or learning about new academic library services, whether in China or around the world. So I wanted to mention that these are the two books that will be coming out from our speakers: The Globalized Library, American Academic Libraries and International Students and Collections and Practices on the left, and on the right, we have Improving Library Services in Support of International Students and Education as a Second Language. So as second language learners. And so they both are similar, but they're obviously both different. And then our speakers will be able to help us define the differences. So from here on, I will pass it to Layla, who might have some insights to international students today. Layla, if you can speak and tell me when to move the slides, I'll be happy to do that. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ray. I will start by giving you some general information about international students. Colleges and universities in the United States hosted more than 1 million international students from almost every country in the world in 2016-2017 academic year. Such a diverse segment of the students' population, with its accompanying wide range of academic library experiences and expectation, bring an array of opportunities and challenges for colleges and universities and the libraries within. Academic libraries are crucial to the success of these students. However, many of academic obstacles international students face that can hinder their success are found within these very same libraries. Understanding the academic environment that international students come from, the barriers that face when coming to United States to study, and the expectations they have of academic libraries is a vital information for colleges and university libraries to develop strategies that make libraries more culturally accessible and responsive to this growing population of students. Academic libraries are uniquely positioned to be campus leaders in the success of international students. United States hasn't always been the top destination for international students, international education. Based on Hansel and Albert's in 2013, historically European institutions were more desirable destination due to their superior reputation until the turn of 20th century, when the improving quality and reputation of U.S. institutions began to attract foreign students looking for a good education and research opportunities. The total number of international students in 2015-2016 academic year was 1,043,839, which was an increase of 7.1% over previous year. Although the total number of international students enrollment increased to 1,078,822 in 2016-2017, it was only an increase of 3.4% versus 7.1% increase the previous year. As you can see in the chart, new international student enrollment was increasing every year until this past year. New international student enrollment in the fall 2016 decreased by 3.3%. This was probably due to our political climate. Can we move to the next slide, please? Most of our international students come from China, India, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. And California, New York, Texas, Massachusetts, and Illinois are the 5 top states hosting international students. The top U.S. institutions hosting international students are New York University, University of Southern California, Columbia University, Northeastern University, and Arizona State University. We can move to the next. Sorry, I already mentioned this. Our top 5 countries were China, India, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. And you can see rest of the countries. Those are the top 20 countries of origins of our international students. We can move to the next slide. This table shows the field of study for most international students in 2016-2017. Engineering, business and management, and math and computer science are the top 3 areas of study for our international students. Next slide, please, Ray. Just over 60% of our international students rely on personal and family funds as their primary source of funding. These students contribute tremendously to our economy. Next slide. NAFSA stated that even though international students only make up 5% of US college enrollment, they contribute to our economy significantly. In 2016, international students contributed $37 million to the US economy. Almost 1/4 of founders of $1 billion companies came from US as international students. We can move to the next. We should continue to attract the best and brightest students from around the world if we want to remain the leader in scientific discovery. As you can see in the picture, in 2016, all 6 American winners of Nobel Prizes in economics and scientific fields were immigrants to this country. And we can move to the next part.
Okay, well, thank you, Layla, for that introduction to the current situations for international students in higher education. That is supposed to give you some perspective while we go into this conversation with 3 of our speakers. And we're gonna just ask this first question here. What are global libraries today? So we'll start with Elena, Lindsay, and then Layla.
Okay, this is Elena speaking, and I'm sorry for my cold. First of all, I wanted to thank Ray for organizing this webinar, and also for everybody who actually tuned in. Lindsay and I, working on our book, came to conclusion that American academic libraries are actually international in nature, you know, by just a sheer mirror of things. We collect materials in many languages, published in a variety of different countries, and in many cases, our collections here in the United States even better than the library collections in their home countries, because of a variety of different issues like political oppression or wars or other conflicts. We also have a lot of wonderful archives of materials that are international, but very much unique to the American libraries. American academic and research libraries also hire a lot of staff for whom English is the second language and who themselves are immigrants, because initially they could actually take care of these collections, but also for a lot of staff with accent like myself, it's American libraries actually a very safe environment and very welcoming environment and non-judgmental. And the environment here in the libraries are always so much better and easier for people like this than in some other industries. In the past years, as Layla just presented to all of us, the fabric of American institutions in terms of students who we accept have been also changing, and we're getting so many more international students, and we also get a lot of students who might be American, but for whom English is a second language. And therefore, emphasis on instruction, outreach, and integrations of these students have become a major priorities for many institutions. But American education does not end simply just in the United States as a country. We're moving our education abroad by creating satellite campuses like New York University, for example, and many others. And libraries are an integral part of developing those campuses abroad as well. For many institutions, words like globalized or international are becoming so much more important, and they're part of their strategic priorities. And with that, study abroad is becoming more important ever. And again, libraries and librarians supporting those activities as well. Finally, one of the great natures of American librarianship is sharing our professional development and our knowledge with other folks in the profession, not only within the United States, but also internationally. And we have been hosting folks from other countries to share our experiences, and we've been going to other countries as well to learn from them and also help them develop certain areas of librarianship there. So I think I'm going to stop here.
Lindsay, do you want to say something to that?
No, I'm sorry. I'll follow up on the next question.
Oh, Layla?
Yes, I was looking at the word globalize in the dictionary. Based on the Oxford English Dictionary, the adjective globalize has been used since 1929. We see it's not a new word, basically. The Center for Research Libraries indicated that over the decades, libraries have built and maintained extensive collections of materials for international studies for use by academic researchers. Libraries are being called upon to serve the needs of global curricula and as well as faculty and graduate students research, both at home and abroad. Along with the challenges of serving a global campus, a library may be presented with significant potential benefit here. This includes opportunities to identify and collect primary sources of material from the region where the institution or research is based, collaborating between U.S. libraries and content procedures in regions of interest, opportunities to build local expertise for buildings, describing, and even digitalizing or preserving collections that can be shared more broadly. A presentation about globalization of higher education by Scott Jaschik and Doug Lederman, editors of Insight Higher Ed, they talk about attracting international students and its effect on the United States. International students, particularly at a state institution, typically they pay higher tuition rates than native students. That creates a larger pools of money to provide campus-wide services for all students and more attractive financial packages for low-income stateside students. With an increasingly globalized world, more programs than ever benefit from a student body that includes those who bring international perspective and experiences. Many institutions now place a higher value on having their students gain a high level of cross-cultural awareness and intercultural skills, even incorporating related goals into their institutional strategic plan. For this institution, bringing international students to the campus is seen as integral to university's mission to prepare students to live and work in a diverse international environment. With all of this benefits, it's not surprising the number of international students that a university hosts is sometimes even interpreted as a marker of prestige. In this regard, the most important function of library is to find, preserve, organize, and provide access to information resources of the region.
All right. Anything else, Layla, or?
No, I'm done with this
Okay.
question.
Great, thanks. So I wanted to just say I definitely see a lot of the trends. So I'm the co-editor with Scott Pollard and Justin Parrott for Bridging Worlds, ACRL's book on building international library campuses. This came out 2 years ago. And what we learned is that we actually didn't really use the word globalized libraries. At NYU, this was a lot of case studies from that where I used to work. It really focused on the global library services as mentioned by Elena, like in terms of supporting faculty and students who would go outside of the US and do research and so forth. But in terms of not just studying abroad, but a actual campus program where they can actually get degrees in these other countries using the same resources from NYU. But how did that work? How do you make that happen? And so I think the term globalized libraries has sort of really emerged out of this area studies, which was really focused, as mentioned earlier, like the primary sources on different regions. And then now it's focused on mostly supporting creating the services that are meaningful. And this is really funny. I was in Vancouver this past weekend, and I was talking to somebody who is not in libraries, and I had mentioned about this webinar and so forth, just for good PR for those who are not familiar with libraries in general. And the person thought it was actually oxymoronic. The person was like, globalized libraries? Aren't libraries just meant to be in like, one location, like sedentary? Like it shouldn't be mobile, right? And globalized has that mobile implication. And so I said, well, actually, it's not just print books. I'm assuming that they're assuming that libraries are just based on print books, but rather it's a lot of this digital information that's out there. And even if it's out there, right, you can access it, but do you know how to access it? Do you know where to access it? And so information itself has been mobile and global, obviously. But in terms of other people recognizing that outside of the industry, it's still catching up. So now we have the second question here. This is more curiosity in terms of your books that's coming up. I know I had just mentioned the titles earlier, but if you can just tell us a bit about the book and what does it cover briefly, that'd be great. So someone from Maryland, and then then we'll have Layla. Let's do that.
Thanks, Ray. So I'll answer this for Yelena and myself. We were really fortunate to receive a ton of great submissions that covered the breadth of activities that we think represent the work of a globalized library. So we were able to organize those books into those chapters into 5 different units. The first one is focused on information literacy. So those chapters are talking about best practices for working with international students or English as second language learner students. We have a chapter on outreach and inclusion, and this is the work that's happening outside of the traditional classroom, non-curriculum integrated experiences that focus on acculturating international students into the American academic environment. We have a section on collections and digital humanities, a section on the library abroad, which includes those study abroad partnerships and satellite campuses. And then finally, we have a section on career and professional development. And that includes things like an international mentoring program and staff exchange programs.
All right, my book, Improving Library Services in Support of International Students and English as a Second Language Learners, is a compilation of 22 chapters by 41 librarians and scholars from different institutions across United States and Canada who share their expertise of successful outreach initiatives, instruction, and event programming for international student and ESL learners. The book is divided into 9 sections, such as who are our international students, lesson plans and instruction planning, collaborating with campus partners, and outreach initiatives to international students. With a documented increase in international students attending American university during the past few decades, it's particularly important to provide best practices for librarians who work with international students and ESL learners. Being a former ESL learner and international student, I have firsthand experience with the challenges that international students and ESL learners face as they begin to use academic libraries in the United States. Basically, this book provides librarians with a comprehensive guide to best serve international students and ESL learners throughout their college studies, contributing to student retention and campus diversity. The effective outreach initiatives found in this book, including collaboration with campus partner, choosing best library instruction practices, and building an ESL collection, will help academic libraries increase the participation rate of international and ESL learners in library. Practical resources such as lesson plan and event planning ideas will also included in my book.
Great, that sounds really exciting. I actually will admit I have a chapter in Layla's book co-written with Lori Bridges, who's at Oregon State University, and Manbina, who is a Sekhon, who is another I think, a graduate student in the social sciences, our book, our chapter for Layla's book, it's actually looking at international students at the age of Trump, just looking at the trends and what's been going on. Actually, now that I think about it, I probably, if we could revise it, which is kind of too late, but there's been a lot of other stuff happening, it would be interesting to add that information there, but next time. So thank you for that. And we will go on to the third question here. This is more specific. If you can share anything that's interesting in your book, specific gems that you could provide for us, any kind of highlights, anything that really stood out that you want to talk about based on what you've read and reviewed for those submissions. Layla, maybe you'll start first, and then we'll go with T. Marilyn.
Sure. I was really overwhelmed by the number of creative instruction and lesson plans, ways of collaborating with campus partner and event planning that I received. Only 1/3 of proposals were accepted based on the experience of the contributors, and also making sure that each chapter in the book would contribute to the field. The topics were selected based on the questions raised in academic library services to international students, interest group meetings. All of the contributors shared their experience with working with international students and ESL learners or with campus partner. They tell us how other librarians can initiate. They tell us how other librarians can initiate programs for these students, and also tell us about what works, what didn't, and what we should consider when planning or working with these students' population. I believe that each chapter selected for this book is a gem, as these chapters provide librarians with practical resources such as lesson plans, instruction planning, creating a special collections, and event planning ideas, and etc. I turn it to Yelena and Lindsay.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. So I'm going to start, and then Lindsay will pick up from there. So like Layla, we were kind of also overwhelmed with the variety and ingenuity of high quality programs developed in this area of librarianship, which run all types of librarianship that you can imagine. We saw some truly unique and interesting partnerships. For example, one of those is African Poetry Library and the University of Nebraska trying to organize community centers and libraries in Africa around local poets. There are some interesting exchange programs between professionals, well-established ones like Arizona State and Japan. We also saw that in some instances, foreign governments are supporting work that is done by American libraries where they have a particular interest, like in the case of a Prunk collection at the University of Maryland, supported by the Diet Library of Japan. There is everything from very simple and low-cost initiatives, such as welcome signs in multitude of languages of students who attend those campuses, or an international film series to kind of help international students integrate into the academic community of that particular institution, to very complex and expensive, for example, like building new libraries and programs in other countries, to which Ray kind of alluded earlier today. And the number of institutions do that. Like we have an article from NYU, but also from the University of Memphis in that respect. And also the share, like in internalization of education of future librarians, like University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, for example, change their masters in library and information science to include this globalized component into it. We also noticed a number of shifts in traditional librarianship, such as collection management in area studies is now moving more towards preservation and digitization, even in terms of general collections, not just special collections. And the enormous amount of information literacy for international students that Layla's book is about. So those are kind of very interesting and new developments that moving librarianship as a whole towards the future. And now, Lindsay.
Yeah, we also wanted to mention how impressed we were by the dedication of the librarians who are doing this type of work. I think that their enthusiasm and interest in supporting these students and in this work is really clear in their chapters. Some of the themes that came out of their work were that this type of collaboration across borders or within a library takes a lot of time and trial and error. Some of the best partnerships came from serendipitous conversations over coffee or from meeting people at conferences. And then other things were a long-term investment where librarians in the US were working with partners abroad to create a partnership, either via collections or some other kind of program over a long period of time. The authors also noted that there's a lot of buy-in that becomes necessary across the libraries and across your own campus. And quite a few folks mentioned working with units on campus that libraries might not traditionally work with. So several chapters mentioned working with an international student services office, for example, or like a student affairs office on campus in order to implement these programs. And everyone who participates in these programs, whether it's the librarians, the students, or other campus faculty and staff, everyone gets a great deal of satisfaction out of the program. And so even though it does take a lot of time and there can be some barriers along the way to implementing programs, everyone seems very satisfied with the final results.
And I think we need to really be aware how much value these programs are adding to the campus communities and to academia at large. Many campuses in their strategic priorities list globalization or internalization as one of their primary goals. And this kind of work becomes part of these goals and in support of the campuses. So as libraries and librarians, as professionals, we need to start thinking in those terms as well, and we need to create vocabulary of value that our administrators, outside folks, our funders can understand and appreciate and give the libraries credit for that. Ray, back to you.
Great. Those are really interesting perspectives. I think it comes down to also this high impact practice, which are active learning support activities to support student retention and success. And of course, global learning and diversity is actually one of them, one of, I think, 10 or so. And what's interesting is that we're looking at not just supporting those international students to stay in the program, but to help them integrate with those who are not with multicultural international backgrounds, to really work and learn and collaborate with those students who are coming here from abroad. And the other thing that's interesting is that there are a lot of ways to do this, right? Like all the speakers had mentioned with campus partners, or you can work internationally or collaboratively. So I thought that was very interesting to hear about these kinds of different groups. And it really demonstrates the value of the library. I think everyone keeps talking about how do we assess or like bring that impact. But with these kinds of services and collaborations with the stakeholders, it really can, as some people have said, really give you that value of investment, the VOI, instead of the ROI, return on investment kind of thing. So more on that, on how the library's role can be instrumental in supporting campus efforts. So here is another practical question, the fourth one. What were the challenges and opportunities in editing a book on international librarianship? So this is more practical for those who are interested in either editing a book, or those who might want to hear more about, just how did they do it with all these international contributors, or the opportunities behind it. So maybe we'll start with Layla and then University of Maryland folks.
One of the challenges for me was sorting through the proposals received. That was the hardest one, trying to narrow it down to 1/3. Also, there were many, as I mentioned, there were many great proposals. I had to sort through similar proposals and try to select the ones that were stronger and more pertinent. My other biggest challenge was time management. My colleague who was planning to be my co-editor couldn't continue due to retirement and relocating to another state. So all of the work fell on my shoulder. And the amount of time it took was overwhelming. If you're planning for something to edit a book, just plan way in advance. At the time, it was hard keeping some of the contributors on the track to meet the deadline, and I needed to be flexible with them. At the same time, it does put additional stress on me as I had deadlines to meet with the publisher. The greatest opportunity was working with all of the contributors across the United States and one from Canada. Some of the contributors and authors came from other countries or had experience working in other countries, so it was interesting to see their viewpoint. I felt really fortunate to work with so many great contributors, authors, who stayed supportive through this process and who are passionate about helping international students and English language learners. Yelena?
So I'll answer for Yelena and myself. I think our biggest challenge was that we wanted the chapters to be representative of all types of academic library work and all types of academic library institutions, and not be focused on one aspect of those institutions or that work. But this also presented an opportunity for us to highlight work that we felt was really unique and might otherwise be overlooked or not celebrated outside of these individuals' institutions. In terms of logistics, we also dealt with some of the similar challenges Layla mentioned. So dealing with a huge number of proposals, all of which were really excellent, and trying to determine which ones to select and what number of chapters we could work with realistically. We initially faced challenges about how to group these proposals into chapters because we did have so many topics that were overlapping, and we didn't want to create arbitrary divisions between those things, but we also wanted to separate out chapters into units that made sense to the reader and allowed people to look through the book and select the areas that were most relevant to their work. The logistics of documenting the process, that was something that we settled on early in the process, and I think if anybody else is planning to edit a book, that's something we would recommend. If you decide on your communication plan and your documentation process early on, it helps to keep records of your submissions, your author correspondences, bio information. And because editing a book is such a long process, we've had quite a few people who changed institutions since the submission stages or changed emails. So it's important to have a central place where you can access and update that information. Another opportunity that we noted is that we learned so much from reading these chapters, and now we have ideas of how we can implement these services in our own institution. And I think without having been involved in the process of editing this book, I might not have learned about all of these different initiatives. And that's it for us.
Yeah, that sounds really great. I was going to say, for those who are planning to edit a book, you really have a combination of options. You could do what the speaker suggested, do a call for proposal, and then get a whole array of really exciting and different case studies and contributions. Or you can select folks, folks, and I'm sure maybe some of the speakers have done that, like identify folks that they know in the field, personally reach out to them and have them write a chapter or give a contribution. So for the book I had edited, Bridging Worlds, we actually knew enough folks to write about how to manage e-resources in a global environment or copyright in an international campus library, things like that. So we were able to just reach out to those folks directly as opposed to doing a CFP, which I've done for another book. And I could feel the tsunami of being like overwhelmed and trying to keep track. But as Lindsay's saying, keeping track of it early on, using maybe a Google spreadsheet, which is something I use, with your collaborators. List them all down, and then make sure that you have a good way to track the submissions and so forth. So yeah, thank you again for sharing the opportunities and challenges. I believe that is, this is the sort of final question here. So this is sort of a free range. Anything else you'd like to share that we didn't talk about already today? Feel free to say something. Maybe we'll start with Yelena.
Well, thank you. So we ended up with like 33 chapters, which I think is a very large number for a book. So we're talking even now about maybe 2 volumes rather than 1. And once again, we would like to highlight the quality of work that we have seen through reading these chapters. It's incredibly educational and quite impressive and very uplifting. I also would like to send thanks to our ACRL editor, Erin Nevius. I think she edits a lot of ACRL books, and she's been absolutely excellent through this project and was helping us a great deal through providing good directions and being very supportive. And finally, our process has been really, really smooth. We both been so surprised by how smooth and the process has been and how much on time it was. And I think for that, we need to thank all of our authors who were immensely responsive to all of our requests and very timely as well. And I think that's once again, talks about how devoted they are to these topics and how they're interested in that and how important these topics are actually to many of American academic institutions. That's about it. So back to you.
Yelena said it well. As Yelena mentioned, I can't thank enough Erin. She kindly provided guidance and support and encouragement along the way. She's a wonderful person, and it has been a pleasure working with her. Also, I would like to thank all of my chapter contributors. Without their dedication and hard work, this book never would have come together. Thank you.
Sounds great. And Lindsay, did you want to say something?
Nope, I agree with everything Yelena said.
Okay, just making sure I don't want to leave anyone out. Sounds good. Now we have about 15 minutes with the audience members. If you have questions, please feel free to type in the chat box. We'd be happy to take any questions you have on this topic. And as we are waiting, I'm going to pull up the title again of the 2 books. Okay, here it is. So we have one question from Allison. Being new to non-law librarianship, what are some of the new and developing challenging issues in globalized libraries, which you feel would be ripe for exploring further? So maybe if anyone wants to answer that first, and then we'll go in that order.
I think that what we saw in our work is that really any type of librarianship that you're engaged in, there can be an international component to it. So I think that depending on what area of librarianship you're in now, that there are issues involved in that librarianship that you can examine from an international perspective. So it'd be interesting to hear, Allison, what type of librarianship you're engaged in now, and then maybe we could give you some more specific recommendations.
Business hospitality at Cornell. So more on like international business law or data, I could see. Interesting.
Yeah, and this is only anecdotal, but I think actually all of the business librarians who I know are like immigrants themselves. And so interestingly enough, I worked with somebody through Emerging Leaders. Her name is Grace Liu, and she is interested in examining the practice among business librarians who are immigrants to the U.S. I know that like happens to be really specific and random, but if you wanted to email me, I'd be happy to put you in touch with her because she's actually interested in exploring connections between that subject specialty in librarianship and the librarians who are practicing it.
And in our case at the University of Maryland, our business librarian, who actually also an immigrant to this country, she goes a lot on study abroad courses as a support librarian for those courses. In fact, we don't have her article in our book, but she's been traveled all over the world with business classes like that, from Latin America to Australia to Far East.
Yeah.
And I would like to quickly mention that there were a couple chapters in my book that it was focused on business students. There was a business librarian working with international students in business and created some instruction and collaboration with those departments. That might be also helpful to take a look.
Yeah, I agree with all of them. Also wanted to add about the business data context. There are actually not a lot of business data on, in many parts of the world, and how do you access that? And I think that is, contingent or like dependent on the governments there and their practices and policies. And of course, looking at like how it keeps changing, right? And how do you find those business data relating to maybe hospitality or a specific industry outside of the Western world is definitely a challenge. And libraries over there are facing and trying to help figure this out in terms of also entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility. Those are also, I think, key themes that I think libraries can support. Thanks for that question. We have another one right here. Sorry.
I just wanted to add, it depends what kind of country in the world you're working with. Some in such a need of materials, including physical materials, books, and so on. So it is very possible to organize some sort of an exchange program or one-way program where things that your library doesn't need anymore could be distributed to those libraries as well. I'm just reacting to what you, Ray, you just said a few minutes ago about that overall need for materials themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for that. Here's another interesting question from Catherine. Have you found that open access journals and OERs are playing a greater part in offering support to globally dispersed patrons?
So we don't have any particular articles in our in our book dealing with that. But from personal experiences, especially with the involvement of MOOCs, and that's also another part of globalized library that we haven't talked. Often when these courses are offered, they're offered to the world, and the OER materials, or open source materials, are becoming very important for those particular classes to provide information to students across the globe, because clearly only a small minority of those students would be able to access materials otherwise. And here at Maryland, when the MOOC program was establishing, there was a very big concern to connect every faculty member who was offering a MOOC with a librarian to help with those type of issues. So I don't have, I'm sorry, I don't have any more kind of detailed information. It will be interesting to see maybe in the near future a book or even an article on this topic. I actually have to confess that I haven't seen much of literature on this at all. So maybe somebody can actually develop a topic like that for the rest of us.
Leila, do you have thoughts on this?
Could you please repeat your question?
Okay. Have you found that open access journals and OERs are playing a greater part in offering support to globally dispersed patrons?
I think it does. My book doesn't exactly focus on this, but we are talking about some of the challenges international students have, or the background of international students. And some of them, they come from countries that they didn't have access to even books. Like their library is closed, the stacks. They have to go and talk to a receptionist in the library in order to retrieve a book and take a look at it. A lot of libraries, they can't even check out a book to take it outside the library. And regarding open access, I think it helps more people have access to resources, but one of the problems we are facing with some of our international students, depending where they come from, they don't have access to internet in some countries the way we have access, or is not as cheap to access internet.
Yeah, I wanted to add that we had a webinar here possibly sometime last year from somebody from Kyrgyzstan, from the American University of Central Asia, Gildes. She's a library director, and talked about OER and what they're doing in the sort of amical level. So like the American universities of Cairo, Paris, etc. But she's based in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. And she talked about the importance of OER because textbooks is just out of control, the prices. And for them, they were trying to find a way to make it more helpful for students studying in that university. So we have 2 more questions here. We'll try to get them before the hour ends. You mentioned, this is from Mark, you mentioned advocating for your work with university administration and tying it to strategic goals of the university. Do you have any tips on how best to do this and raise the profile of the work?
Well, I think it's quite a challenge to do. And however, there are some institutions that are more open to that than others. For example, the decisions for NYU to open the libraries in Middle East or in Asia came from administration, and so the libraries had to comply with that. I think for majority of us, we start small and we start working on a particular project. But I think it's very important when you start working on any project, no matter how small or big it might be, to start involving your administrators, your supervisors, the supervisor of supervisors need to know what you're trying to do, where you're at. So initially, in my personal experience, initially people just kind of interested or not maybe even interested, but they stand there by you and they see how it goes. And if it gets a lot of good friction, then eventually the institution will adopt your project. I think it all starts small and grows step by step. And I think it's very important not to think of it, oh, I can do it all, at once, and everybody will be supportive. Every project, like what people have shown in all of the articles that we have, every project had its pain, growing pains. So it's slow and steady, and I think people who are involved in this work have to have a lot of patience to get it to the very next step. Liz, you want to add anything?
No, that's great.
She's fine.
Okay, Leila?
Sure. Yelena basically mentioned what I had in mind, but one more thing I would like to add, in order to reach out to administrative, sometimes it's good to work with other partners, or like if you have a diversity committee in your library, maybe you want to work with them, and also working with campus partners such as international services, study abroad. This is just not you, there's a bigger group that you're presenting and talking, basically.
Sounds good. Thank you. This is the last question for the panel. Can you talk more about current trends in collaborating with international libraries? This is from Ariel. My institution serves zoology researchers and scientists, and partnering with international zoological libraries could be beneficial.
Can I jump in first?
Yep.
So as we try to say that there is a lot of different types of work you can do. I think for a specific institution, you need to get in touch with your researchers at that institution and see what they're doing and who they cooperating with. I think a lot of doors will open up, or the needs will become very apparent once you talk to your faculty, to your researchers, and they will push for certain things that the library can do. It's whatever the libraries are doing, we cannot do it in a vacuum. It has to be related to the greater purpose of the institution. And for us, it's often means to work with the departments or faculty directly in advancing their agenda. I think that's probably, this is the way, I'm looking at that. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to this.
Layla or Lindsay, or? Okay, so I will say briefly that I worked at NYU Shanghai, and I was the liaison to the research institutes, so in neurosciences and computational mathematics. And one of the things we tried to do was connect the research that was being held at the East China Normal University, our campus partner, with the colleagues in New York. So really building that kind of a rapport. So something we had thought about doing was creating a global newsletter. So it was basically something we had conceptualized, creating it in Chinese and in English, and promoting the research and the tools and the library resources available for the researchers and those who might be interested. So that was sort of like one step to promote the research, especially in the STEM field. That's really about looking into those innovations and cutting edge tools out there and profiling the scientists doing the work. So hopefully that gives you some ideas as well. But the hour is up and we still have a lot of folks here. Wow, that's great. I really want to thank our speakers, Yelena, Lindsay, and Layla, for really giving the time to talk about their upcoming book and really giving us thoughts on international librarianship, student services, and so forth. And I want to thank ACRL and all of you for coming here. We won't be having a program at ALA this year, but we'll have more webinars next year. So a sneak peek would be having folks from as far as Vanuatu to Galapagos Islands. I have librarian colleagues there, so they'll be presenting this coming fall. So that should be exciting. And so thank you all again. And the recording will be sent out soon, sometime today. And have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.